Okay, we have a special treat today. One of your classmates, Ko, is going to share some interesting information about their medical diagnoses. And we've done this before when we had someone in class that had a neurological diagnosis that was relevant and I thought you could learn from. And so I'm going to sort of do it as an interview like we would do an interview for the winter project. So Ko, thank you so much for doing this. And hopefully it'll help your classmates put some things together. So first of all, tell us about your original diagnosis. What was your original diagnosis?
When I was 14, I sustained a traumatic brain injury in a state soccer game that led to an MRI over concerns of a subdural hematoma. I had a headache that was progressively getting worse and not getting better. So they did an MRI, and I did have some signs of still some progressive injury that may have bled and then kind of clotted. But it wasn't the main concern. The main concern was the ping pong sized brain tumor in the back of my head. So I am missing about half of my cerebellum.
Okay, so the MRI was the thing, and you will see that a lot where people have a tumor in an area that may not be causing them a problem right then, and they get imaging for something else, and on the image it feels like, whoa, there's a tumor. So what was your treatment? What did they do?
So I had what's called a fibrillary astrocytoma. Basically, the tumor itself looked like the dendrites of an astrocyte. Fibrillary means finger-like, so it kind of, the way that I now imagine it, having gone through the education I have, is that the tumor itself looked like an astrocyte. So they resected it, and I had 5 days in hospital. They did a little bit of the physical therapy that we're going through in procedures 3, just to make sure that I could get up and move around. And then after that, I was gone. I didn't have any other physical therapy for gait, balance, or even the trauma sustained in my neck. This was 20 years ago, 2004. So physical therapy has progressed quite a ways since then. Now I don't think that they're gonna cut open an athletic teenager's neck and be like, okay, bye. Because I was up and out before they even had the shoelace stitch out of my head.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So, and I think what you said is true. For lots of different types of surgery, they used to you'd have therapy when you're in the hospital, and then bye.
Well, even pelvic therapy is becoming more common. When I was born, when my brother was born, we were both C-sections, and it was okay, up and bye.
Yeah,
that's a big abdominal surgery.
Right. So that's a good trend, I think, for us as therapists, is people are getting more therapy and more continuing therapy, which is great. So after you were released from the hospital, what challenges did you find?
So a big thing is learning to walk with a normal gait. Actually, during gait analysis, I have a slight Trendelenburg or waddle gait on a good day, and then this quarter I also had a traumatic brain injury, so it was very predominant because I'm missing that balance and coordination center of my brain that later on I was taught kind of to, because I don't have dynamic stability. So when I move, my center, I kind of have to compensate because I am missing such a large part of my balance.
So tell us about the new traumatic brain injury. So let's make it interesting.
I sustained a traumatic brain injury at the beginning of the quarter. Came literally the night before our first lab. I don't remember a good chunk of the quarter. But I've had so many brain injuries that I immediately knew that I had messed up. But luckily the department was very supportive. Just things like not being able to sleep. For me, that's a big thing. For some people, it's that they sleep too much. For me, I couldn't sleep at all. These are things that are briefly covered in our traumatic brain kind of skim overview.
You'll get more of that next quarter.
Yeah. But you know, some patients, they have crazy mood swings, they get really depressed. I hit that depression stage about halfway through, but the first 2 weeks I'm just really giggly. And so any change of personality is a big kind of sign. My balance definitely was a big thing. My cognition, it just kind of looked like I was staring off into space for a lot of it. But I also experienced BPPV for the first time. I've had a lot of brain injuries in my life, and this is the first time that there's been a vestibular component to it.
So yeah, that's the thing with concussions. You can have anything that your brain is covering, basically. So you can have vestibular symptoms, you can have vision symptoms, you can have personality changes, like Kayla was saying. So any concussion, no matter how mild, is a mild traumatic brain injury, and these symptoms can be progressive. So, or not progressive, but cumulative. So you have one traumatic brain injury, no matter how mild, and you have another one, and you have another one. The closer they are together, the more likely the symptoms are to be cumulative. But Ko told me something that was interesting about their original surgery, making it easier for them to get a traumatic brain injury. So
yeah, so like I said, I've had many traumatic brain injuries in my life. However, something that has made it significantly easier for me to go from a simple concussion to a traumatic brain injury is that I am missing that large chunk of my brain. So by taking a chunk out, it doesn't really, like, it fills up. There's some cerebral spinal fluid that will fill up, but if you've been snowboarding for 6 hours, you're likely dehydrated. These things can affect the fluids in your body. Think if you try to get your blood taken and you're dehydrated, it's significantly harder to find a vein. Well, if you're dehydrated, it also has that effect on your cerebral spinal fluid. So dehydration plus an existing hole in my head made it so that the remaining part of my brain had extra space to kind of rattle around in there, coupled with a strong history of traumatic brain injury and the traumatic brain injury of all traumatic brain injuries, brain cancer.
Brain surgery, yeah.
It will make it significantly easier. If I'm dehydrated and I have a really bad allergy attack, I was told by my new neurologist that I could probably give myself a concussion, or even, you know, going to a metal concert and just headbanging really hard. I can probably give myself a concussion on demand. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Do not advise.
Not recommended. Do not recommend.
But it basically, what could be a concussion to my friends that I was riding with, some simple, okay, you fell on your head, you bumped your head, always wear your helmet, no matter what you're doing, always wear a helmet. Took that extra space, and where theirs would have just done something like this, mine does this.
So just having that extra space in your cranium, because the part they took out, it makes you more prone to traumatic brain injuries. So I
just have less mass.
For
so
the future therapists going forward, what would you recommend working with a patient who's had a traumatic brain injury?
Traumatic brain injuries are very interesting. I actually, in my clinic, I work with a lot of concussions and brain injuries because of my personal experience. They're frustrating because you feel disconnected from your body. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a stroke, if it's a concussion, if it's a TBI or brain tumor or something. There's some part of you that you're not able to control. And so support is huge. Making sure that your patient understands that it's temporary, but also heavily pointing out the progress. Pointing out, you know, tangible things that they can see. I had a patient recently that was also suffering a traumatic brain injury. He was actually comatose for 2 weeks. And so he would get really, really upset because he's an active sport guy, jiu-jitsu wrestler, motorcycle rider, all these things. But he couldn't walk in a straight line, you know? So being able to point him out that while recovery is very slow, it took 8 weeks before I got to a point where I felt like cognitively everything turned back on. Even then, I still don't feel like I did in December. But being able to point out tangible things and objective findings, so doing things like neurocog testing. You know, there's a number of things that we can do in clinic that can, if it's recording somebody doing a task and then recording them again and showing it to them side by side, like, look at how much better you're doing.
That is an excellent tool to show patients their progress, because as any of us who's had any kind of injury, much less a brain injury, know that it is hard to tell from the inside that you're making progress. So showing the patient, like, here's what you looked like 6 weeks ago, here's what you look like now, that can be a big light bulb moment, and they can say, oh, I really am improving.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, is that those of us with brain injuries, we already feel very disconnected and we are dealing with a lot. So having somebody from an outside perspective be able to be like, okay, no, here's actually what I'm seeing, because I only see my patients twice a week. I live with myself 24/7. So I had friends, athletes, coworkers, my bosses actually, after 3 weeks, told me, good job, you tried, you're not in trouble. But they've known me for 8 years. KO, something's wrong. You need to go to the doctor. So sent me to the doctor, had an MRI. MRI says that while very beat up and very scarred, I do still have a brain in my head.
Andy.
So that's the other thing about my original diagnosis. When they did my craniotomy, they found out that I have an abnormally thick skull. So I at least don't get skull fractures, which is another reason to wear helmets. But some patients will have skull fractures, TBIs, on top of orthopedic injuries. And so whiplash, things like that. And so treat the whole patient. I'm an athlete. I'm big in board sports. I am a weightlifter. My coaches, nobody said, KO, stop what you're doing. They said, modify what you're doing.
Yeah.
So don't tell somebody that they have to stop what they're doing, what they love. And that's something that I was told when I was 14. Is that I was told that I'd probably never snowboard, I'd probably never skateboard. I was told that they weren't even sure I would ever walk again.
Yeah, and doctors love to say stuff like that, and we love to prove them wrong.
So support your patients in a way that they feel seen. Even if it's outside of necessary treatment, you know, there's nothing wrong with doing 95% of treatment for their injury and then taking the other 5% and doing it for them getting their life back. You know, my TBI patient is a jiu-jitsu guy, and he's like, look, I feel like I'm making progress. And we were still very much working on his head injury, but he's like, I want to be able to start trying to do some jiu-jitsu moves. So he pulled up some clips on YouTube and showed me some simple moves he wanted to do. I was able to take that and modify it. He wanted to do what's called what's like a release from being pinned. Simple bridge progression. It would get him back to being able to do that activity, and then he had better recovery mindset because he felt like he was progressing towards where he wanted to be.
Yes, and that is really important. The activities that we choose in the clinic have to be salient to the patient. The patient has to feel like they're working towards what they want to do, not just what we want them to do. That is an excellent point. And like you said, you looked at the movement, you broke it down, you said, I can start him on a bridge progression, and then he knows where he's going. And that is really important. And that's kind of what we do. We look at what movement do they want to do or need to do, and how do we break it down to something that they can do now and work towards that?
And that goes for like L&I patients though, because a lot of
absolutely.
L&I injuries will come in, and you can have an L&I brain injury. I've been one of them. I have a dent in my skull because of an industrial injury. Funny, right? Abnormally thick skull. I have a dent in it.
Better than a fracture.
Yes. But I wasn't treated for what I do outside of work.
Okay.
I was treated only to get back to work because it was an L&I injury. I'm a whole person, not just an employee.
Yeah.
So treat the whole person, not just the injury.
That's good. That's an excellent theme for the day. Okay. Thank you so much, Ko. I really appreciate it. And I know your classmates will appreciate hearing that information. And I'll post this as a discussion board. If anybody has any questions, we can talk about it.
Just remember, brain injuries of any sort, they take time and they take a lot of support.
And patience.
Yeah, I'm not a patient person.
All right.